Hello, friends, and welcome to Syracuse Sports. My name is Brent Axe. Come in, relax, take your shoes off, enjoy yourself for some good old-fashioned sports talk here. We are going to focus on the NBA Finals here, but with a Syracuse twist, as kind of the theme of the pod this week is that as there are Syracuse people everywhere. Not that you need a reminder of that, the Syracuse Newhouse Mafia, but not just Syracuse grads, people connected with Syracuse that we worked with in Syracuse. Syracuse is everywhere, baby. You can't get away from us, even if you tried. Even on the furthest reaches of Antarctica, I'm sure somebody there would know somebody from Syracuse. So we've got two guests joining us today to give us the finals perspective from each side and with a little bit of a Syracuse tilt. Mike Curtis, former colleague of mine from syracuse.com. He's got a really interesting story to tell. He spent half the year in Detroit covering the Pistons, who at one point went on a 28-game losing streak, and then he kind of upgrades halfway through the year and ends up in Dallas covering the Mavericks for the Dallas Morning News, now in the NBA Finals. How about that? Going from covering the worst team in the league to a team in the finals. So we'll get Mike's perspective on that, this team, this matchup, and he had a really interesting story to tell about how you kind of have to find stories no matter where you are, even during weather delays. So we'll talk to Mike Curtis about that from the Dallas perspective. We're also going to have Drew Carter today. Drew, a recent graduate from Syracuse, a former student of mine at Syracuse, now doing play-by-play for ESPN. Also, the incoming voice of the Boston Celtics. He does work for the Celtics now, but he is going to take over for a play-by-play legend in Boston next year. Covering the Celtics is all the pressure on the Celtics here, this team, this matchup, and a couple of Syracuse-related stories from Drew as well. So I'm looking forward to getting the perspective from both of those gentlemen on the upcoming NBA Finals. But you know whose perspective I always enjoy? Yours, our Syracuse Sports insiders. Now you're thinking, Brent, it's summertime. Hey, what's going on? What can I know? What can I learn Syracuse sports-wise? Whatever there is to know, you're going to learn it as a Syracuse Sports insider by texting the word orange to 315-847-3895. There's still recruiting news out there. There's still Syracuse basketball transfer news out there. There's still all kinds of things happening, plus your connection to this podcast. So we had Isis Young on this week, terrific WNBA analyst, former Syracuse basketball player, of course. We're also going to have an Axe Brent Anything episode. That's right. Later this week, all your questions, and by the way, every single one of those questions comes from our Syracuse Sports insiders. We answer their questions directly, and it is truly an ABA, if you will. You can ask me anything. Now, a lot of the questions are sports-related, but we have some fun. We get creative. All kinds of topics are covered. The only way you can participate in a fun episode like that is to be a Syracuse Sports insider. So become one today. You can try it free for 2 weeks. After that, it's just $3.99 a month. $3.99 a month, less than $1 a week to get breaking news that we have first, to get my inside analysis, questions, opinions, and your ability to connect directly with me via text message. So we would love it if you would become a Syracuse Sports insider today. Loved the conversation with both of these gentlemen. Let's hear first from Mike Curtis, then from Drew Carter. Let's talk some NBA Finals here. Mike, this is fascinating. You said it yourself. You went from covering a 28-game losing streak, a team in the basement of the NBA, setting all kinds of historical marks that no one will want to remember in terms of being associated with it, right? But still fascinating to cover, to a team in the NBA Finals in one season. It's like you got traded from a team vying for the number one pick in the draft to an NBA Finals contender. This is incredible. Just tell me about this journey you've been on, going from covering that team to this team now getting ready to play for a championship.
Man, yeah, Brent, it's been interesting for sure. I think one of the first things that come to mind is I don't think I'm alone in that experience, so to speak, just because on the Mavericks, PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. Both of those guys were acquired by Dallas at the trade deadline. PJ came over from Charlotte and Daniel Gafford came over from Washington. Both of those two teams were at the bottom along with Detroit for the majority of the year. And now they're on the cusp of winning NBA championship.
There you go.
And of course, I'm covering the championship team, caliber team. So it's been really interesting. I've learned how to cover losing at the highest level, and I think or at the lowest level, whatever you want to call it. And I've learned how to cover winning at the highest level too. So it's definitely been two different dynamics, but I'm just grateful for the journey.
Is there anything covering Detroit taught you about covering Dallas? Because to me, we're just trying to tell good stories one way or the other. And I would rather be on one extreme or the other. Like you just mentioned, those guys that came from Charlotte and Washington, and those are kind of like meh franchises. You know, they're not at either end of the spectrum, whereas you have been on the complete ends of the spectrum here. So I guess you're telling great stories either way. What did your Detroit experience get you ready for what you're now experiencing in Dallas?
Yeah, I think even long before Detroit, just going back to my days in Syracuse, I think that really prepared me for what I was about to experience in Detroit. Because covering my last season covering Syracuse basketball team, that was Boeheim's first season below 500.
Right.
And we had to ask a lot of tough questions. And that prepared me for going to a team that has been last in the NBA standings 2 years in a row now. And we had to ask a lot of tough questions. It's interesting when you get on this side of it because everyone's, I don't want to say a little bit more upbeat, but a little bit more positive. You're not asking about ownership, GM struggles, chemistry in the locker room, how certain guys fit. At this point, you're just asking on a nightly basis, hey, what went wrong tonight that you guys weren't able to pull out the game? Or you're asking about injury concerns. Like Luca Doncic has been battling right knee soreness and left ankle soreness for the majority of the playoffs. And they usually shut those injury questions down. And probably rightfully so, because we see what he's been doing despite.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I've learned a lot covering two different dynamics, but I would say just asking those difficult questions for sure.
So you brought up Luca. There is a stat about him that we'll get to, and he has just been incredible. You don't need me to tell you that. You see it firsthand, and people that are watching see it firsthand. But you mentioned ownership. Very important question here. Have you met Mark Cuban yet?
I have. I met him during the Clippers series. That was my first time meeting him. He welcomed me to the beat, open arms, said, if you ever need anything, just let me know.
That's great.
He's like a pretty cool guy.
Did you pitch him a product for Shark? What's the name of that show he's on? Shark Tank. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to get that idea ready.
You never know. You get a meeting with Mark Cuban, got to have that pitch ready to go. But that he just seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if he's as involved with the team anymore. He's still around, and he's like the figurehead, even though I think he sold part of the ownership of the Mavericks, if I'm not mistaken. But he just has always been, to me, the most player-friendly owner, and he's the one you point to that kind of modernized a lot of things, shook up the NBA, and we brought up the TV shows he has, and obviously he's noted as one of the great entrepreneurs out there. Now that you're there and you see it firsthand, like what have you seen about his influence on the Mavericks? This is their first time in the finals in 13 years, but it's always been a go-to place for players to want to be.
Yeah. He sold his majority share. Patrick Dumont is the new governor. And it's interesting because even though he's not the majority owner anymore, he's still there on the sidelines. He's still cheering on his guys. He's still around. And I think, for a long time, whenever you think about the Dallas Mavericks, you think about Dirk Nowitzki. You probably think about Mark Cuban, just because they've been synonymous with the franchise. And I think just the kind of the influence he's had, like you said, he's always been player friendly. He's always been like pro player. So I think it's interesting when guys want to come here and they see how the culture is. He added Cynthia Marshall as the CEO of the franchise, and a lot has changed since she came in. I think it's a pretty neat environment. When I'm around this team, I see, how they say like a team is like your family. I see everyone's friendly. I see everyone like fist bumping. Everyone's talking, laughing, smiling. They do this half court shot contest between the coaches and the players pretty much at every shoot around, every practice. Of course, Luca does the trick shots during his pregame routine. So I think that helps when you're able to like have fun with the game of basketball, because that's exactly what it is. It's a game. I think a lot of people forget that. It helps with team camaraderie and team chemistry.
We'll get into the nitty gritty here and the X's and O's a bit in the matchups in a sec here, but a couple things I wanted to ask you about. It's always interesting when this comes up. The final schedule and how they kind of pace this thing out and try to make every game an event. And there's a lot of time in between the conference finals and the finals. And even when you look at the finals, like if this thing goes the full way here, Mike, we're talking about the end of the month. Like this occupies an entire month, which the NBA likes, right? Because this is your signature event. You want to own a month. The NFL just has taken so much oxygen in the sports world that if you can carve out something they can't touch, which this month they pretty much can't, there's mini camps and things like that, then the NBA is going to do that. I also think it's interesting from a media perspective because there's a lot of time in between games to kind of formulate some storylines and come up with some good stories and really dig into it. And let's face it, like there is just an army of people covering the finals now that swoop in here, and a lot of national media comes in. So it gives you as a reporter more time to do your job. But let me ask you, what do you think of kind of the spaced out final schedule and how they do it?
Yeah, it's interesting because in the conference finals, you had a day between games, pretty much from games 1 through, I want to say, 5. Obviously, Dallas beat the Minnesota Timberwolves at 5. The Boston Celtics swept the Pacers. So they didn't have a need for those additional games. But for the finals, there's almost 3 days in between every game from 1 through, I want to say, 5. So they're spreading it out. Game 1 is on the 6th, this upcoming Thursday. Like you said, game 7 could be as far as it could be on the 23rd if it gets to that point. And I think it gives, like you said, it gives the game a lot of attention. We all know like the overreactions after every playoff game. The team that wins, they're going to be propped up and put in a position like they're going to win the entire series. The team that loses, it's going to be like the sky's falling. What's wrong? What adjustments can be made? So I'm really interested in looking forward to seeing who comes out on top in game 1, because that's going to tell a lot going forward. I know teams typically like to use game 1 as a fill out game to see what works, see what doesn't, see how the other team is defending them. And I think Boston has a pretty good chance, obviously, just because they're the home team. But from a media perspective, like you said, just the spacing out of each game, I think it's pretty okay.
Let's get into that a little bit, Mike, here. The storylines are there, but there's some good meaty basketball to get into as well. What intrigues me about this series is Boston has, statistically, however you look at it, they're one of the most efficient offensive teams ever, right? Whereas Dallas, certainly they can score a little bit, what Luca's doing with that backcourt with Kyrie, and you kind of see these exciting players. But the interesting thing about Dallas, as you've seen, is when Jason Kidd made that lineup change, it was shortly after they got blasted by Boston, as a matter of fact. They have turned into an elite defense. They've allowed the fewest points per 100 possessions in the league over the rest of the regular season since he made that lineup change and he put Derrick Jones Jr. into the lineup here. So you got a good old-fashioned offense versus defense matchup here, it would seem, on paper. But what are the matchups that really intrigue you going into this?
Yeah, I think from just the first glance, everybody's going to look at the dynamic duo between Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown versus the Mavs' dynamic backcourt of Luca Doncic and Kyrie Irving. Obviously, this is where the stars step up and they have to be their best, most optimal version of themselves. So I think we're going to see some fireworks, especially early on. Luca is coming off a dominant Game 5 win over the Minnesota Timberwolves, where he scored 20 points in the first quarter, and pretty much put that series to bed before Game 5 could even get started. I think Kyrie has reemerged as, of course, that offensive magician that we all know him to be. He's had some moments in the playoffs where he pretty much defers to Luca, but I think he kind of regained that rhythm in the series against the Timberwolves. He was able to get to his spots, be a little bit more aggressive. And we're going to see, obviously, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Those two guys equally have a similar skill set. They both can get downhill and score. They both can create for their teammates. And defensively, they're pretty good just because of their size and length. You mentioned the offense versus the defensive dynamic. I know Dallas is known as an offensive team because of those two guys. But what really makes them special is the fact that they're able to kind of switch and play defense. That's a credit to Derrick Jones Jr. That's a credit to P.J. Washington and Daniel Gafford. Derek Lively II coming off the bench. He's just a rookie, but he's playing well beyond his years. And then you have Kyrie, you have Luca, and they're actually wanting to step up and play defense, which I think has translated to making this Dallas team even more formidable.
We could do a whole podcast about Luca. Let's face it, this guy is just a force, right? But I saw this and I kind of chuckled. Doncic's production, which is at 28 points and 8.8 assists per game, and efficiencies, shooting 51% from the field, have dipped significantly. Okay, but that's from a league high 33 points per game, just under 10 assists per game, and 58% from the field. So I'll take those numbers. If that's Luka struggling, like, yeah, give me that every day and twice on Sunday. But you brought it up. He's battling a little bit of an injury here. So I think this makes it even more of an intriguing storyline, Mike, because he is putting up these kind of numbers and is just an absolute force to watch every time he's on the court. And he's not even 100%. I guess a lot of guys aren't 100% at this time of the year, but what kind of injury is he dealing with here? And he's still putting up these kind of numbers.
Yeah, I think the main one is just that knee. He banged it pretty bad against Ivica Zubac in the first round of the playoffs against the Clippers. And he was hobbled throughout the rest of the series. There were times where every time he fell to the floor, there was kind of a gasp, like, is he going to get up? Is he going to be able to kind of play through it? He's gone to the locker room a couple of times and just come back and he's fought through it. So I think that's first and foremost. He's also dealing with a little bit of an ankle problem in his left leg that I don't think has bothered him as much recently. But it's interesting too, because I think after the Game 5 against the Timberwolves, you see he has his Western Conference Finals MVP trophy, and you kind of see a spat of blood coming out of his coming out of his protective padding on that knee. And that's happened quite a few times. So he's definitely battling through injury, and it's pretty remarkable how the performances he's still been able to put up. We know he hit that game-winning shot over Rudy Gobert early in the series. And you just kind of wonder, like, how is he doing all this? But it's been pretty cool to kind of watch him go. Like we've all seen him go from afar. It's been pretty cool up close.
Like, I think we all kind of get into this, whatever this is, if that's writing or podcasting or getting into covering sports, because you're a fan at first. And I remember when you were here, you're a big NBA fan. You would talk NBA with a lot of people around the office. And how much has that helped you cover this team? Because with Luka specifically, like, you must have gone very deep into the thesaurus to describe this guy, right? Because he's just every night he's doing something maybe you haven't seen before or you don't know how to describe, right? Because he's just that darn good. So to me, it always comes back to being the fan of the game and just being in awe and being in wonder, if you will, of what these guys can do and describing it that way. Have you found yourself going back to that? Because, man, Luka, just when you think you've seen it all, he'll top that night after night.
Yeah, I think that passion for the game that I've pretty much always had since I was a kid, that helps me a lot at this level, just because I'm able to, I guess, describe and realize what's normal and what's not. Like Kyrie Irving, he has a tendency to, when he gets into the lane, he's throwing up a left-hand floater. And we know he's ambidextrous, but he shoots with his right hand. But the fact that he's able to finish in a variety of ways with this left hand, I think it's pretty significant. He had the game winner in the regular season over the Denver Nuggets. I think everybody remembers he drove on Jokic and then he just floated
Right.
it up with that left
Right.
hand and it went all the way up and came all the way down. So just moments like that when he's hitting fadeaway threes and Luca's hitting sidestep threes, like that part of the game. Of course, people are going to look at Luca's scoring, but his passing ability is insane too. I think it's just because like he's able to put the ball perfectly where it needs to be. I remember there was one instance in the last series where he threw an alley oop to Derrick Jones, and Derrick Jones he was still at the 3-point line by the time the ball left Luca's hands, but because he placed it exactly where it needed to be and he knew where his teammate was going to be, it was just a perfect connection. So just watching basketball on a nightly basis, I still love it. I wouldn't trade it for the world, but I definitely think that helps at this level.
A couple more things for you here, Mike. A couple media related things.
Yeah.
Compare. You've been all over the league, right? You travel with the teams and you get to see the kind of ins and outs. I don't know if this is like a standard procedure across the league, but I'm curious about coverage because one thing I've always told my students at Syracuse is you have this rare thing now in that Syracuse basketball always had an open locker room and it would give you the opportunity to get your own stories, right? You're not sitting in some press conference with 3 players at a table and everybody's getting the same quotes, right? So how did that experience help you carry over to the NBA? And do you find that's the case in the NBA? Like the finals, it feels like there's media opportunities, every 10 minutes, right? So that's one thing, and we'll see how that develops. But just what's been your experience like in covering the league? Is it open locker rooms? How is the access, and is this still kind of a media-friendly operation in 2024?
Yeah, it definitely is media friendly. And like you said, Jim Boeheim always had an open locker room, which helped a lot to kind of diversify the coverage. And I think it's interesting because the first year I started covering the Pistons, the year before they were still dealing under the COVID rules, and I don't think they were still on Zoom at that point. But my first year coming in covering the league, they reopened the locker rooms back up. I think people kind of had to get used to it again. Players had to get used to it. Media had to get used to it. But ever since, of course, it's been an open locker room. It's pregame, postgame. It's in my experience, I've been able to get guys after the podium just as a quick one-on-one when they're walking away. Just if I have a couple of questions that I particularly didn't want to answer or ask in the presser, sometimes I'll be able to kind of get that time with them afterwards, and I think that helps a lot. But it's definitely been helpful. Like there's no shortage of quotes, information. We talk to the coaches pretty much on a daily basis, except for when they're at shoot around. But practice, games, you're talking to somebody every day. So I think that's what makes it pretty interesting, just from a coverage standpoint.
You have to find stories in a lot of different places. And you were in a situation recently that really intrigues me because no one likes to hear about sports writers complaining about travel and plane delays and all that stuff. I feel like I see that on Twitter every day. But you were in a pretty unique situation recently because a weather delay caused you to miss Game 5 of the Western Conference Finals. You literally couldn't get there because of some weather in Dallas. So you had to make lemonade out of lemons there. And you wrote a pretty intriguing story. Now, this was not a name that I knew by name, right? But when I saw him, I was like, I know that guy. So tell me about Jimmy Goldstein and writing a story and covering something from afar because you were prevented from getting to do your job. And we're talking about a pretty important game. This is the Western Conference Finals. But how did you make something out of nothing there?
Yeah, so I think it starts with the Game 4 loss that the Mavs had to the Timberwolves at home. So right after that game, you don't know if it's going to be a sweep. You don't know if it's going 5 games. So I think a lot of writers and a lot of fans had to wait until the results of Game 4. So when Game 4 was over and it was apparent that it was going to be Game 5, everyone's going to the websites to kind of book their flight information. And I get on there and all the flights for Wednesday are taken. and I'm looking at flights and they're literally disappearing. So that means I have to book a flight for Thursday, which is the day of the game, which is something I never do. I always try to get there the day before. So I had to bite the bullet, get a flight 10 a.m. I want to say on the day of, and when I got there, it was okay. But then you hear, hey, weather, incoming weather. It may delay our flight by a few minutes. That delay turns into 30 minutes. The next delay turns into an hour. So I think our flight was delayed probably 4 times. And then once we were finally on the plane, we were on the plane for, I want to say, just riding around the airport, just an hour and a half, waiting for the rain to go away. It's just brutal. And I'm thinking, okay, it's okay. Just 1 delay, just 2 delays. I'll still get there in time. 3 delays. Okay. But yeah, it pretty much got to the point where by the time I was going to get to Minnesota, it was probably going to be halftime. It wasn't really worth it. I talked to my editors. They said, just try to cover it remotely. So as I'm getting off the plane, I see the cowboy hat. I see the leather jacket. And I'm like, oh, that's Jimmy Goldstein. So for people who don't know, Jimmy Goldstein, super, super big NBA fan. Very wealthy. He's made the majority of his wealth through real estate investing. But he's pretty much at almost every big NBA game. You always see him. So he's 82. He's in his 80s, so he's up there. But he's just traveling alone, and we pretty much got off the plane at the same time. And I asked him, hey, you're going to the game, right? He was like, yes. First conference finals game I'll ever miss in 35 years.
Wow.
I'm not happy. He was pretty upset. And I asked him if I could talk to him about it on the record. He agreed. Pretty much said like the last finals game, he's been to like all the conference finals games since in 35 years. The last finals game he missed was game 5 between the Warriors and the Cavaliers. And that was a game that Draymond Green got suspended for. But yeah, he was pretty upset, man. He had to go watch it, I think, at his hotel afterwards. But yeah, he wasn't pleased. But it was a way to make lemons out of lemonade, since I wasn't able to go to the game. And I think Luca Doncic's father was on that flight as well.
Oh, wow.
But he actually made it in time before the game ended, so he got to celebrate with his son. It's a
great example of always keep your eyes open. And I mean, Jimmy Goldstein stands out. Like, that's a guy, like, you don't have to look far because he just pops, as you said. But
yeah,
the story was right there. You got to keep your eyes open. You could have grumbled about having to cover it remotely and, no, this darn flight got canceled. But, you just always got to keep your eyes open because you never know what's there. And I read your story and I was like, man, this is the first time he's missed it. And all these games he goes to. And I was curious about him too as a person. Like, I know that face. I see that jacket. I'm like, who are these guys? And to hear you kind of describe who he is and how big of a fan he was, absolutely fascinating. So good lesson for budding journalists out there. Always keep your eyes open. There's always a story there. Even if your flight gets delayed and you think your night's done, maybe it's just beginning.
Absolutely.
Mike, it was great to catch up, man. I am so happy for you. I just know you would cover the worst team in the league. You would do that, and you would do it with a smile on your face, and you got to do that. But I'm happy that you get to cover the finals, you get to cover an intriguing team like this, and you're seeing the world, you're going to different places, and just really happy for your success and what you've been doing, and keep up the good work, my friend. It's great to catch up. I would love to do it again sometime, but thanks for hopping on Syracuse Sports with us today, my friend.
Anytime, Brent. It took me back to our days. We were doing our post-game show after
That's
every
right.
game.
That's right. I taught you everything you needed to know right then, just doing those post-game shows, right?
Absolutely.
I learned more from you than you learned from me. Trust me. Drew, the NBA Finals are coming here, and it's funny because the other guest we had on this podcast was our old friend Mike Curtis from syracuse.com, who goes from covering the Detroit Pistons this year, who at one point were on a 28-game losing streak, into the penthouse, if you will, and a team that's in the NBA Finals. The Celtics, they've been in 6 of the last 8 finals, conference finals. They're expected to win this thing. So from Mike's perspective, he's covering a team where they're playing with house money. Do you look at this Celtics team as the expectation is if they don't win a championship, that's it. This was a disappointment, or however you want to frame it. It just feels like the Celtics have done everything but win that title with this bunch, and everybody feels like this is the best team to do it.
So first of all, Brent, this is kind of surreal for me because for the folks who don't know, Brent was my professor in an interviewing class.
That's right.
So to do an interview with you is kind of cool in a full circle, and I appreciate you bringing me on.
Absolutely. It's great to have you here, man.
Yeah, it's a cool time to be, with the Celtics and be rooting for the team. It's my first season with the team and truly could not have asked for much more. It's a pretty good welcome because, like you said, they do expect to win the championship. When I say they, I'm talking about the fans, but also the organization. I think the moves they've made in the last few years have proven that. And so far, so good. I mean, to enter the NBA Finals with only 20 losses combined between regular season and playoffs is pretty rare air. You typically don't see teams that dominant. And of course, I know what people say about the playoff run. The three teams we've played have all been missing their best player for either the whole series or periods of it. But to go 12-2 through the Eastern Conference still speaks volumes, and they've won in a variety of ways. So all that to say, I do think they're the best team. They have been all season. The way this roster is constructed, it makes a lot of sense. They're all in on this season. They've traded a lot of first-round picks and pick swaps. We know about getting Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis this offseason, but even going back to trading for Derek White, bringing Al Horford back. Tatum and Brown have been the kind of two constants, but they're in different roles now than they have been. I would say even a couple of years ago when they were in the NBA Finals and lost to Golden State. To me, the team is built perfectly and ready. Like if you look at the timeline of best players winning championships, typically your best player on a title team is not in his early 20s. Usually the earliest it happens is mid to late 20s. And now Tatum is 26, Brown's a similar age. They're getting toward the point of their career where guys typically peak. And you look at the best players in NBA history, that's typically when they start winning championships. So I'm not saying Tatum is on like an MJ or LeBron type track, but that is when you typically start to win titles as the best player. And I think this is the year they should be favored.
Yeah, you got to go around the block a couple of times. No matter how good you are, no matter what the impact is, you just have to have been there and done that. And they have both been there and done that in the finals. And now it comes full circle here. And one thing I'm really interested in with the Celtics team, and you've seen it firsthand, look, they've gone 12-2 in this playoffs. Nothing's easy per se, but they've made it look as easy as it can be at times. The stat I keep coming back to, Drew, and there are a million analytics out there, but I keep reading this sentence: the most efficient offense in NBA history. Why is this team the most efficient offense in NBA history?
First of all, a little caveat with that. So it's points per 100 possessions. So if anyone out there isn't into analytics, they're probably rolling their eyes. But it's just basically it measures your offensive rating, and the Celtics are, I think, a 122 offensive rating. So they score 122 per 100 possessions, which sort of simulates a real NBA game in terms of the pace and how many shots you're getting up. That stat dates back to 96, 97 was when the play-by-play era started. So there might have been, in the 40, 50 years of NBA history before that started, there could have been a more efficient offense. But with that being said, Brent, I have not seen an offense operate like the Celtics have this year since I've been, watching basketball in terms of how their spacing is always on point. Usually everyone on the floor is a pretty good three-point shooter. They're really the only guy in the rotation who doesn't shoot threes is Luke Cornett. The irony there is when he came into the NBA, he was a three-point big man. He was like a stretch five. He set the record for most threes by a 7-footer in college when he was at Vanderbilt. But he doesn't really shoot anymore. He's the only one in the rotation who is not a threat from outside. Once you have that, the spacing is outstanding. Opens up gaps for guys like Tatum and Brown to slash. Derek White, Drew Holiday. You have two guys who would be above average point guards on pretty much any team. They kind of split the ball handling duties with those two wings. The difference this year to me, Brent, is you bring in Kristaps Porzingis, and now the Celtics have an answer when their three-pointers aren't falling. We know about the Celtics shooting threes, and they shoot too many, and blah, blah, blah. Live by the three, die by the three. Very common trope that to me is overblown. But the thing is, this season, if they are cold, like they were in the Eastern Conference Finals against Miami last year, they have a second option, which is killing you in the post, attacking mismatches, punishing smaller players trying to defend Porzingis. And I think that emphasis on the post-up game has sort of seeped into the rest of the team. Tatum is bigger this year. He added 12 pounds of muscle in the offseason. He's really good in the post as well, and playmaking out of that. Jaylen Brown is a great post player too. Even Drew Holiday, who's 6'3" or 6'4", he's built and he can defend in the post and also score on the block himself. The team has a lot of different answers depending on what type of defense you try to throw at them. And when they play fast, they are really, really hard to stop.
You brought up Porzingis, and I was watching your interview with the Golics, and of course, fellow BDJ 351 alum Claudia Bellafato is doing a spectacular job on that show and in life. We'll have to get her on the pod sometime soon. Did your prayer sequence on Porzingis work? And people have to watch the pod to get what we're talking about here. But people are wondering about Porzingis, right? Because he brings such a dynamic to this finals if he's healthy. Now, he's not 100%. Luca Doncic is not 100%. Who is 100% at this time of the year? But from everything you've been able to gather to the moment we've talked to, how healthy is Porzingis and what kind of impact can he make?
In honor of Kyrie returning to the Garden, I've been burning sage trying to put good vibes into the air for Porzingis' calf. It's an interesting one because the reporting on this has always been, I would say, a little bit hazy, a little bit nebulous. The initial report from Woj, really the first news we got on it, was that he was going to miss a minimum of several games. And if you watch the Golic interview, we talked about this. Like, what does that even mean? Yeah. A minimum of several, or I think it was a minimum of at least several games. It's like, could you have any more caveats in there? Like, what does that mean? The later reporting was they were, targeting a potential return in Indy, so games 3 and 4. And I think if that series had extended, Brent, I do think he would have come back. But if you're the Celtics, I think you look at it as this is an injury where you need rest and you don't want to risk anything. I'm not a doctor, obviously, and I don't even pretend to play one on TV. But the thing that has people so concerned about the calf strain is if you go back 5 years in the NBA Finals when Kevin Durant had a similar injury and he came back and he was doing jumping jacks in the tunnel and he was ready to go. And then he comes out and right away he blows out his Achilles. It's like, all right, now we're all terrified that that's going to happen to anyone with a calf strain. And it's weird. And if you look at the NBA, there have been a bunch of calf injuries. That's what kept Donovan Mitchell out of our series in game 2. Jamal Murray had something. He played through it. Obviously, KP. It just seems like the calf, for whatever reason, I heard a theory on Brian Scalabrine, my partner with the Celtics. He does a radio show every day. A caller chimed in. His theory was that because players are doing the step back more than ever, maybe it puts more stress on their calf. And I'm like, I hadn't thought about that. Maybe there's something to it. But I think what it really is guys are much more athletic than they have ever been. Even with the addition of, 10 sports scientists on every franchise's team playing, the game is still so fast and so physical that maybe that has something to do with it. As it pertains to Porzingis, the reason I bring all that up is you want as much rest as possible. By the time we start the finals, it'll be over a month since we last saw him. I mean, he got hurt against Miami. I think he's going to be closer to 100% than people are expecting. And I do feel like, and this is not, breaking news. This is not inside intel from the Celtics, but I think if he had a chance to play, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and he's gotten that extra rest, he's been practicing, I think he's going to be just fine and good to go. And it's huge in this series against Dallas where Jason Kidd, I think, is doing a really smart thing. He's platooning his 2 big men. He's platooning Gafford and Lively. They basically just alternate 3-4 minutes like they're playing hockey almost. And that keeps those guys fresh. They're young. They're bouncy. They're vertical spacers. They run to the rim. They protect the rim. And if the Celtics went into this series relying on Al Horford in year 17 as their only real center, and even he is more of a 4 than a 5, I would have serious concerns about that. KP comes back. All of a sudden, the equation changes. Again, your spacing is better. You can attack mismatches better offensively. And I think where he might be most valuable in this series is protecting the rim. If you watch Dallas play offense, Luca is a maestro in pick and roll, like truly one of the best pick and roll players in NBA history, and he's only 25. I know that sounds kind of crazy. He is that good in the pick and roll. He can dice you so many different ways. He can obviously finish. He plays at his own pace. He can kick it out. He's so good at waiting until the last second to kick it to an open shooter, and then he can lob it up to Lively or Gafford. You need a guy like Porzingis who's 7'2", 7'3", with a 7'5" or 6 wingspan to protect the rim. And when I say protect the rim, bat down, lobs to those guys, and also just make Luca make the decision maybe a split second earlier. That's where he's going to be super valuable in this series.
Drew, there is a rare Syracuse angle in the NBA Finals, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more coming up here. But first, I want to ask you specifically about Oshae Brissett and the role he plays with the Celtics and what role he could play in the Finals.
I would love to see him get some run. I think when Porzingis comes back, it might not happen. Oshae, we remember him from Syracuse, Brent. I mean, I was in school when he was there, and obviously you covered him. He was more of a wing, right? He played on the wing in the zone. He handled the ball a little bit more. He was kind of the second eye. He was the 1B really to Tyus's 1A when Oshae was at his best. This is a much different role for him, and I think it's a testament to him and how he can stay in the NBA. When he comes in, he plays short bursts, kind of like I talked about with the Dallas Centers, and he is super high energy. It's like plugging your phone into an ultra speed charger for a couple minutes. That's what the Celtics do when they put Oshae out there. And it's really fun to watch. He crashes the glass. He defends super hard. He'll give you a couple fouls. He'll use his foul limit. For this series, I'm not sure how much we'll see him though. That's the thing. Really with everybody healthy, he's our 9th or 10th man. So I hope he plays. It's funny. Celtics fans have sort of clamored for more Brissett minutes with Porzingis out, because Kornet has struggled at times in the playoffs. And Brissett just gives you such a jolt that, we want him to play a little bit more. Bill Simmons is maybe the most famous Celtics fan in media.
I saw
has
that.
Latched on. If you go through his timeline, he'll tweet every now and then, like, why will Joe Mazzulla not play Oshae Brissett? And it's hard to say. I think the lack of shooting is a big reason why. We talked about their spacing. I'd love to see him get some burn. I'm just not sure if it's actually going to happen.
Yeah, I got a kick out of that for sure, seeing Bill tweet that. But it is exceedingly rare to see a Syracuse player in the NBA Finals. Dion Waiters won a ring a few years ago, never played a minute in the Finals. And he was in a situation, he was going to win a ring no matter what, because he played for both teams that year, right?
Yeah.
Before that, that's 2020, the last guy to win a ring, to play in the NBA Finals, was Marty Burns in 1980. And Drew, he played exactly 1 minute in those finals. Before that, and this is not even a Syracuse, it's Dennis Duval, who at one time was the police chief here in Syracuse, and that's a whole different story for a different day.
Yeah.
He played like a few minutes in like the 75 finals. Like, you just don't see this. And this has been a topic of discussion through the years. Every year I get a call from a student like you when you're at Syracuse doing a story about why don't Syracuse players make it in the NBA? And I'm just like, I don't know. They just don't, right? Like, there's been plenty of guys that get contracts that make money, that there's certainly a lot of Syracuse NBA veterans. But when you're talking about guys that have made it this far, it's a very, very short list. So that's why I was kind of bummed to see Porzingis come back.
Yeah,
I know
right?
Celtics fans are not, because now we're probably, as you just laid out there, probably not going to see our guy Oshae Brissett that much. But he'll win a ring if the Celtics win a ring, and I guess we'll take that. And he had more of a contribution to that title than any of the guys that I brought up before on, again, what is the short list?
Hang on. You got to give me a tease for this Dennis Duval story. This guy was the police chief.
Yeah.
He played in the NBA.
Yeah. Yeah. Syracuse guy, was the police chief at Syracuse. I'd have to go back and look at the exact years, but got into law enforcement after a pro career. He played for the Warriors. He played for the Bullets, I want to say. Couple of different teams, had a nice pro career, and then was the police chief of Syracuse, New York, amongst other things. Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
Very interesting guy.
It doesn't matter if we don't have, guys in the NBA finals every year. We have the original shot clock.
That's
downtown.
right.
So
that's
who's
exactly
really
right.
winning? Yeah.
That's exactly right. Which came up recently. Of course, Bill Walton passed away, and his time with the Celtics, and everybody remembers that. When they put up that shot clock in downtown Syracuse, the monument, Bill Walton was there. And I wrote a story about this recently, Drew. The connections that Bill Walton has had with Syracuse, that Marty Glickman,
Yeah.
basically coached him out of his stutter when he was 28 years old and gave him the confidence to do that. Of course, Dave Pasch and all the Syracuse broadcasters, Mike Tirico, et cetera, that he's worked with through the years. So there's always a Syracuse connection, which is kind of why I'm having you on the pod and Mike Curtis on the pod and a few other people this week, because no matter where you turn in sports, you are going to find a Syracuse connection. So it's funny you bring that up, because no matter where you go, you don't have to go far down the list to see that. I'm sure you're seeing that now, being out there in the real world in sports broadcasting, right? Like you're amongst friends everywhere you go. It must be.
Exactly. There's a reason they call it the mafia. You find friends where you would least expect to find them. And that's cool. There's a big, Syracuse, Boston pipeline. Obviously, people who study journalism like I did at SU and then end up coming to Boston. A lot of people, I'm in a group chat with a lot of Syracuse alumni, and a bunch of them live here. Sean McDonough is probably, the biggest name of a Boston native, Hingham to be exact, who, has Syracuse ties, and now he's back. And so I could hang out with him. It's really neat that the doors that open for you when you go to Syracuse. You could be in like Twin Falls, Montana, and you'd probably meet somebody who either went there or is from there and has some sort of connection.
Drew, we mentioned it. You're out there now. You're working for ESPN and transitioning into this role as the voice of the Boston Celtics, which, just say that out loud. I mean, the legend Mike Gorman, who just retired. I think of Johnny Most back in the day. Now there's the Steel by Bird underneath the DJ. Like there are some names on that list.
Yeah.
You have had the unique opportunity, though, you're kind of a draft pick that got ready for the job during the season, right? You mentioned you're working with Brian Scalabrine and, you're part of the broadcasts. But what's that transition been like for you? And has it kind of dawned on you being in that city and obviously the big deal that being the voice of the Celtics is? What's that like for you?
Yeah, it's crazy, Brad. And I feel like, you ever watch The Office? Have you seen that show?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's the last episode, maybe second to last. Andy Bernard says, you wish you could know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them.
That's right.
And I think about that a lot because I'm trying to do the best job I can of soaking it in, while also realizing I have a job to do, and I'm trying to do that at a high level. The first time I went back to Syracuse, actually, as a professional, was in 2021 to call a football game against Liberty, which was our biggest win of that season. Liberty had Malik Willis. Hugh Freeze was the coach, and it's a pretty big game. It was on a Friday night at the Dome. And Andre Schmidt hit a game winner, which was kind of like a holy bleep moment for me, because Andre Schmidt had been the walk-on freshman who won the Groza my senior year. So
right.
For him to still be there and then call that for ESPN was kind of nuts. But anyway, the only reason I bring that up is because I feel like in hindsight, looking back on that week, I did a great job of embracing the fact that I was back at Syracuse and, seeing some old friends and talking to some students. But I probably didn't do a very good job of keeping the main thing, which was that I was there to do my job. And looking back on that, I was way too juiced up. It was a Friday night at the Dome. I was basically screaming the entire time. I'm sure people in Lynchburg, Virginia hate me because granted, we were on ACC Network, so you could have a little bit of that orange tint,
yeah.
But I basically called it like I was on student radio. And thinking about that, I was like, next time I'm in a spot like that, I need to just focus on the job. And I've been really lucky to go back to Syracuse a bunch of times and do football and lacrosse. And it's been great to go back and look at it from that perspective of let's keep the main thing. So I've tried to apply that to the Celtics too, where it's like, this is amazing that I'm in the NBA every day for the first time. And I'm working with, the most prestigious franchise in the league, and we have the best team, and there's a chance we win it all. That's amazing. But it's not about me. It's about the team. It's about the job. It's about enhancing the experience for the viewer. And so trying to balance that, soaking in the moment and being appreciative of it, but also not thinking about the fact that I'm here and trying to focus on the job and almost act like I've been here before has been a little weird. I got to be honest. And so I'm excited for next season when, I take over full time. Mike is, fully retired now, and I get to see him at the games, and his wife, Terry, and we get to hang out. And by the way, Terry used to work for the Big East. So speaking of, Syracuse connection, she basically ran the Big East network. So she knows all these people we're talking about. And so I think as we, progress, it's going to feel a little bit more natural, normal, relaxed. I'll feel settled in. This first season has been kind of a whirlwind. And so for me, the key has been focusing on doing the job at a high level.
Drew, I've been to Boston enough that I wonder if you feel this too. And I taught you guys in class, don't ask leading questions, but I kind of want to take you down a path here. When you're in a city that has 4 major professional teams, there's going to be some crossover, right? There's going to be fans that are rabidly passionate about all 4 teams. Just listen to sports radio in Boston, you will get that sense.
Oh, yeah.
But unlike any city I've been in, and I've been to a bunch, the 4 teams in that, it's like 4 different worlds.
Yeah.
Patriots, Celtics, Bruins, Red Sox. There is crossover, but those fans of those particular teams are so rabidly passionate about each one, and they kind of find themselves in one of those worlds, and they pay attention to the other 3. Does that make sense to you? And being in that Celtics world, man, there's nothing like it. Am I leading you down the right road here? I've gotten that sense a lot in knowing Boston fans and being in that city a bunch, that if you're a Celtics fan, it's like, I know what's going on with the other teams, but the Celtics are your world, or whatever of those 4 little worlds you want to put yourself into.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the cool thing about this season is the Patriots suck right now. So all the people who love the Patriots are like, I guess I got to latch on to the Celtics or the Bruins. So if you think about our current landscape here in Boston, think about the Big 4. Patriots are awful, and they're excited about Drake May, but they're going to have to see it first before they maybe hop back on the bandwagon. The Red Sox, everyone's pissed off at ownership because they never spend any money. You're a Red Sox fan, right? Am I remembering that correctly? Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about.
I'm one of them. Hand up. Absolutely.
Everybody's injured. The team is not built very well. They've actually been kind of surprising, the fact that they're like 500 and hovering in the playoff race, but people were really pissed off going into the season. So no one's happy about that. Tickets are like $10 to get in and sit in right field, which is the place to sit. And then the Bruins are really good, but all of a sudden, there's a lot of scar tissue from what happened last season, best regular season ever, lose to the Panthers in the first round, get bounced by Florida again this year, which is just a travesty. I mean, the fact that a team in Sunrise, Florida, with like 10 total fans who actually have skated before in their lives, eliminates an original 6 really good Bruins team twice in a row, just pisses me off. And I'm not even a huge Bruins fan, but just living here, it's not right. So you have that's the situation with those 3 teams. Meanwhile, you have the Celtics, who are just killing everybody, and it feels like sort of a revival of the set. Like this Celtics core has a chance here over the next 5 years or so to do something really special, and give the city what it hasn't had in 40 years. You think about it, they've won 1 championship since 1986, and that would be unthinkable for a Celtics fan who's been following them, for all of their history. So I think people are really excited about the Celtics. I think I mentioned the scar tissue with the Bruins. There is a little bit of that with the Celtics fan base as well. Like you mentioned, 6 of the last 8 Eastern Conference Finals, only been to the NBA Finals once and lost. But with how this team has evolved and how Tatum and Brown have now ascended to that status as all-NBA players and the age they're at, it feels like this is the right time, and everything is kind of coalesced where Boston is green right now. It's not red and blue for the Patriots. It's not black and yellow for the Bruins. It is a green city at the moment, which has made my job more fun, and I think, more profitable for my bosses. And it's been just really cool. Cause like, if you go into a fan base and you're calling games for a team that's not very good and doesn't have a lot of attention on it, it might be good in a way where you can make mistakes and people aren't going to crush you for it. But it's also just not as cool as when you're in a building and you go on the road and half the fans are Celtics fans. A quick story on that. We were in LA to play the Clippers a couple days before Christmas, and Russell Westbrook came over to where Scal and me, where we were sitting. We're about to tape our open, so they're going through the layup line. And Russell Westbrook comes over, and I just assumed that he and Scal were friends, They overlapped a little bit, their playing crews. I think maybe Scal had been retired, but Scal's just very prominent in the NBA and does that show I mentioned. So I just assume they knew each other. Come to find out they do not. And Westbrook just likes to mess with the announcers. So Russ is behind us. I'm sitting here with Scal. He's making fun of us behind, oh yeah, that's a great point. Nice, whatever. Scal turns around. He looks at Russ. He goes, "There's a lot of green in this." And then he uses a swear word. "There's a lot of green in this MFer." And Westbrook's like, "What are you talking about?" Scal's like, "There's a lot of green in this MFer." Russ is like, "A lot of green." Scal's like, "Yeah, it's like that wherever we go." He goes, "Wherever you go, F out of here." It goes back to the layup line and dunks. And I'll always remember that, Brent, because first of all, it's Russell Westbrook. He's hilarious. It's kind of a pinch me moment. I'm sitting right next to Brian Scalabrine and Russell Westbrook basically going back and forth. And then Scal was right. That building was half green. And it's like that pretty much everywhere we go. And so that makes it really, really fun.
That's incredible. Those are the moments that you remember.
Yeah.
That's a great story. I appreciate you sharing that. All right. One last and very important question to close with here, Drew. Mike's Pastry, Modern Pastry, or I'll give you a wild card choice that maybe I don't know about. Which one?
So if you talk to people in Boston, you'll know that they are trying too hard to convince you they're from Boston if they say Bova. So there's this other bakery in the North End called Bova, which I've never been to, so I shouldn't knock it until I try it. But I feel like those are the people who are like, well, actually, it's like the people from Philly who are like, Pat's and Geno's, they're not actually good. You got to go to D'Alessandro's or Steve's or whatever. It's they
got a place. Yeah.
Hey guys, it's okay if you like the popular places. I'm a Mike's guy. I actually just had a cannoli from Mike's yesterday.
My guy.
I played in the North End Cornhole Classic, which was a Sunday in the North End. So that was fun. And I had to get a cannoli while I was up there. I'm a Mike's guy, but I've heard that Bova not only has good cannoli, but also has late night buffalo chicken croissants. So that's on my list. I have a list of places in Boston I need to go, Brent, because I've been here about 6 months and I'm trying to, check them all off the list before I retire in 50 years, I guess.
All right. Well, digital fist pound to you because Mike's is my spot.
Nice.
And like you said, look, it's like when people come here and they want to go to Dinosaur Barbecue. I'm not going to be that guy that's like, no, I got this secret place here. You got to go. No, go to Dinosaur. There's a reason there's a line out the door every night because it's good. And when you go to certain places, I've never been to Philly, believe it or not. When I go to Philly, I'm going to Pat's or Geno's just because I want that experience. So there you go. There's a reason, by the way.
You've never
There's
been
a
to
line
Philly?
out the door. I've never been to Philly.
You're not missing anything, Brent. Not missing anything.
I love it. I love it. Taking the shots.
It's also, hey, just to prove my Syracuse knowledge to everybody listening and watching, it's a lot like Possibilities to me. I think Possibilities is fantastic.
It is.
I love going there. But everyone's like, oh, the wait's too long. It's overhyped. Go to Francesca's. Go to Avicoli's. All great options. But you got to try Possibilities.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. 100%. I am with you, Drew. My guy. Well, it is great to catch up. I am so happy to see what you're doing and the success that you're having. And, it makes me feel a little older when I catch up with you guys and you're like 5, 6, 7 years out of school. You were telling the story of coming back. But it's great to see what you're up to and continued luck and success to you. Appreciate you hanging with us today and dropping some knowledge on us on Syracuse Sports, and hope to do it again soon, my friend.
I'm not the one making you feel old, Brent. That's your daughter. She's got that handle.
Yeah, let's just not talk about that.
Thanks, buddy.